One of the things that's changed with Boris Johnson moving forward is the possibility of a Brexit, so-called without an agreement, seems to be larger. The markets certainly are pricing that in. Is the UK government, is the British government preparing for that possibility internally? Are people taking the actions needed to be taken just in case it happens?
Well, thank you, David, for having me on. It's great to see you again. I think two things I would say. First of all, the British government has always been preparing for no deal, at the same time as negotiating a deal and aiming to deliver on the outcome of the referendum by leaving the EU with an agreement with the EU and an agreement, a commitment to negotiating the future relationship. The Prime Minister, as he said on the steps of Downing Street yesterday and in the House today, has made clear that he believes that we now need to deliver on that democratic will of the people. He is turbocharging, is the word he used, no-deal preparation so that we are ready to leave on the 31st of October without a deal. But he also made very clear that's not his preference. His preference is still to leave with an agreement, and that is what he and his government will now turn their attention to, negotiating with the EU in the 98 days left that we have until October 31st.
Explain the government system in this way. Is it physically possible to have a Brexit with an agreement in 98 days? Because we hear there's a lot of legislation that would have to be enacted by Parliament. This is not a simple thing. They don't just sign a document. There's a lot of work that has to be done. If they got an agreement tomorrow, would that give enough time to actually effectuate a Brexit by October 31?
I think the Prime Minister's instruction and the instruction from the Cabinet, and the Prime Minister also said that he's spoken to the head of the Civil Service to make sure that the Civil Service is doing what's necessary, is to be ready for all eventualities. His preference is to leave with an agreement on the 31st of October, which would take us into a certain scenario. If necessary, if we are not able to leave with an agreement on the 31st of October, then his conviction is that we must leave without an agreement, and the government and the Civil Service must do what is necessary to be ready for that.
One of the things we saw yesterday was a fairly sweeping set of changes in the cabinet. A lot of cabinet positions are turned over, more, I think, than you normally have with a member of the same party taking over, as opposed to the opposite party. What does that do as a practical matter to the internal workings of the government? I mean, does that sort of slow things down for a bit as people sort of figure out where the washroom is and things like that?
I mean, I've been in the civil service for a long time. I've seen, as you say, changes of party in power, but also changes within. So I was in a Majesty just as Gordon Brown took over from Tony Blair. People have commented that this was quite a sweeping change. I think there are two elements of continuity. One, that the policy on Brexit, although the Prime Minister would say that he's now determined to carry out that decision, the policy is not that different. And the other policy priorities he mentioned in his speeches, education, social care, policing, funding the NHS, and also delivering productivity and growth across all parts of the United Kingdom, those are all constants. Those are policies that the new ministers will inherit from their predecessors. And the other piece of continuity is the civil service, who is there to serve the government of the day. They will now, my colleagues in London will be briefing their new ministers. We still don't know who some of the junior ministerial positions are, but as they come in over the next few days and over the weekend, we will be briefing them up, and we will be ready to hit the ground running. Let's
be a little more parochial. What does it mean for the United States? I mean, this is part of your brief, as I understand it. What real concrete differences are we likely to see in the relationships between the United States and the United Kingdom because of this change of government?
Again, I don't think there will be substantive changes of policy. The Prime Minister said today that he's absolutely committed to accelerating work on free trade agreements, but that is what we were preparing for anyway. So we will now continue to do what we need to do to understand with our US colleagues what putting together an FTA looks like, and when we are out of the EU, we'll be ready to negotiate from the get-go. And on a whole host of other issues, including, on the foreign and security policy side, there will be new relationships to be sort of created at the top of the system, but there are a lot of relationships that will continue sort of further down the food chain.
Well, one relationship that already has developed is between President Donald Trump and Prime Minister now Boris Johnson. Do you think that that might facilitate some of these things, such as a free trade agreement? Because certainly President Trump was unabashed in his support for Boris Johnson as a candidate.
So, as I couldn't, you've summed it up perfectly. He was very vocal in his support for Boris Johnson, and he has been very sort of complimentary about Boris Johnson since the Prime Minister won the Tory leadership election earlier this week. But again, I would just note that the previous Prime Minister and the President were both very committed to negotiating an FTA. So again, there is continuity there. The change of tone is maybe something that people have remarked on, but then again, it just helps to put this extraordinary relationship together and take it into the future.
Extraordinary relationship, but what is number one on your agenda in terms of a challenge in UK-US relations at this point?
I'm not sure I see a challenge. We talk a lot about opportunity. We talk a lot about deepening and strengthening the economic relationship between our two countries. We're already the biggest investors in each other's country. The US is our single biggest export market, and I talk in terms of the US being both a fundamental source but also consumer of UK innovation. So this is a very strong platform to build on, but our contention is that if we look at the global economy of the future, we look at some of the challenges that we're going to need to address, including maybe on some areas where we're not maybe 100% on the same page, maybe around climate change. And again, the Prime Minister today recommitting the government to our target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. But again, these are areas where we will be working with the US at all levels. We share a really broad, substantive policy agenda that we want to carry out together.